And this episode of Juice Guru Radio is brought to you by TriBest, Making Healthy Living Easy, and the Juice Guru Certification Program at juicegurutraining.com.
Welcome to Juice Guru Radio. Discover what the magic and power of juicing can do for you. And now, your host, best-selling author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Juice Fasting, Steve Prusak.
Well, hello, I'm Steve, and today's guest is best-selling author and mindful parenting educator, Michelle Gale. She teaches parents how to connect with our children by first connecting with ourselves. We're going to find out all about it. She's the author of the new book, Mindful Parenting in a Messy World. We'll be back right after this with Michelle Gale.
Juice Guru Radio.
And welcome back. We've got Michelle Gale. It's going to be an incredible session. We're going to find out how we can be more mindful as parents in this messy world. That's her new book. You can learn more about her and the work she's doing at beamindfulparent.com. We're going to have links to that under the show notes at Juice Guru Radio, so you'll be checking out there. And let's welcome to the show right now, Michelle Gale.
Hey, it's nice to be here. Thanks for sharing me with your community. I appreciate it.
Well, it's really exciting to have you. I know you worked at Twitter and other high-growth tech startups, and now you're doing completely different work. So how did you go from the work you were doing there to this transition in life?
Yeah, the transition actually started long before Twitter. It actually started in college when I was introduced to meditation and mindfulness, and I was having a really hard time. I was stressed and lonely and have a lot of anxiety. I'm naturally anxious. And I went to a Unity church and sat for the first time and kind of had this experience of quieting down. And then fast forward many years later, 10 years later or so, and I'd been in the tech world for a long time as a recruiter, and I decided I wanted to be an executive coach. And the program I joined, Sitting in Meditation, was a part of the program. So I started sitting regularly. That was where I really landed on a regular practice and path. And at that point, I had two very young children. One was 6 months and the other was 4. So they have been a part of my practice since the very beginning. I didn't really have much of a choice. They were around as I was really learning to practice and practice regularly. So I had to be very creative, as you can imagine, having two such small children. And that was kind of how the mindful parenting was born. And then when I worked at Twitter years later, I had never worked out of the house full time. I'd always been a consultant and had a lot of flexibility with my schedule and got to experience for 2.5 years what it was like to be a parent and, on high speed. I was working 60, 70-hour weeks and away from home and needed to be really creative with how I connected with my kids and how we interacted when I was there. And that's really how the book was written, because I would try all these different ways of staying connected to myself and to them. And I'd tell these stories and people say, do you write this stuff down? Do you write this down? And so eventually I wrote it down. That's how the book came to be. And that's how I ended up moving more into this work. Really being at Twitter inspired me to want to go back into corporations when I left there and to bring mindful parenting into companies. That's a big part of what I do.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, and as parents, and it's a journey raising the little ones. And when you talk about a messy world, what are you getting out there?
Messy world is just the stuff of our lives. It's just the day-to-day. It's just what we all deal with as parents, right? It's waking up and somebody peed their bed and you have to start stripping the beds, or hopefully it's when you woke up. In my case, it was often, 2 or 3 in the morning for a very long time. And it's the breakfast and the toast burning and the dogs barking and being late to the meeting that you're going to. And how do we stay present and sane and actually find joy in that mess and find learning and our own growth in that mess? That's what really excites me.
So how do we define mindfulness?
So mindfulness, if you ask, 20 different mindfulness teachers, you'll get 20 different answers. I love John Kabat-Zinn's definition is paying attention on purpose in the present moment non-judgmentally, right? And that the non-judgmentally piece is the key. And I also like to add in with curiosity and kindness. So mindfulness is about being present with whatever's happening right now with curiosity and kindness, being interested, even if it's something that's relatively unpleasant.
Well, I can think of a lot of things as a stepdad that could be unpleasant. And, some of these things, some of these challenges could be behavior issues and things and just, things we don't expect. How do we become more mindful in those moments when, the kid is having a tantrum or acting out or just being completely disrespectful?
Yeah. I always tell parents and executives that I work with as well, be them parents or not, a big part of being a leader, whether that's at work or at home, is tolerating discomfort. The higher you get up into an organization, when I work with CEOs, I always tell them, like, you are now need to tolerate the most amount of discomfort, okay? Because everything comes back to you and people are going to be talking behind your back and unhappy with things. And really your job is to be able to hold that. And as parents, that's our job as well. My young guy had a lot of temper tantrums when he was really young. We didn't know he had a lot of learning differences and things going on that were not diagnosed. And we didn't know what they were about. But because of my practice, my intention was to be able to hold that for him every time. So he'd be laid out on the floor, 45 minutes, an hour at a time, screaming. And I'd be sitting there letting him know, I'm here. Tell me what you need. Can I give you a hug? You can scream as loud as you want. I still love you, right? Just letting him know I'm here. I can hold this with you. And in a lot of ways, I can hold this for you because his nervous system was so dysregulated. So my job was just to sit and regulate and regulate and regulate and help him because our nervous systems are not separate. I don't know if you follow the work of Dr. Dan Siegel. He has this body of work called Interconnected Neurobiology. And what he teaches us is that our nervous systems are connected. They're affecting each other. So when our kids are having a real hard time, the very best thing we can do is to keep ourselves calm. I know we're not going to do it every time, and certainly I don't. And after all these years and all this work, I'll still snap, and I'll still lose it. But my kids know they can kind of be like, really, Mom? And they know I'm going to come back and I'm going to repair the situation. I can remember years ago being in the car with my oldest son, who's 14 now, but maybe he was 10 at the time. And we'd had a blow up and I probably said some things I didn't mean. And not that anybody listening would ever do such a thing. And I was in the car and I said, Tyler, I want you to know I'm sorry about what happened earlier. And he goes, I know. I'm like, what do you mean you know? He's like, Mom, you always apologize. And I really appreciated that he knew that because it's true. I will always apologize, right? I will always own my part in it. And that's what I teach them. We're all going to own our part.
Yeah, that's the new age. Because I know growing up, my parents were never wrong. Yeah, they never apologized. It was always me, of course.
No.
It is good that we can realize that we can actually learn from our kids and that we're not always right.
Yeah, we can learn from them, and we're not always right, and we make mistakes, and we want to teach our kids to be able to fail, right? We want to teach them to be able to fail, and some of the best ways to give them permission to do that or give them permission to make a mistake is to make the implicit explicit for us, because often we're thinking it, but we don't want to say it because we don't want to be wrong. I mean, we don't want to admit our errors or our mistakes. But as we model that for them, and that goes with mindfulness as well, because people often ask me, and you may have the question in your mind, how do I teach my kid to be mindful? I get that all the time, and my response is always the same: don't. You practice. And so there are some kids that are really interested in practice and they'll eat it up, particularly if they're little, and there's a lot of sweet books, and I did a lot of recordings with my kids and listening, and they were very open. But if they weren't, I wouldn't have made them do it. And now that they're older, they're definitely not interested in general in sitting or in practicing, but they get it through me. They see me sitting in the mornings or in the evenings or in the middle of the day. They see how I take a breath and I'm like, oof, I'm really triggered right now. My jaw's tight. I can feel my heart beating. My belly feels a little funny. Like, I'm going to take a minute, right? That is mindfulness. And we're teaching it to them by by doing it ourselves.
Well, we're here with Michelle Gale. She's the author of Mindful Parenting in a Messy World. We're going to hear some strategies on how we can, in the moment, become mindful, because it's all fun to sit here and say what we could have done, but how do we deal with those challenging moments in real time? And we've all been there. So we're going to find out all about that. Tune in, get yourself some water, some tea, some juice, and let's get back to our interview here with Michelle Gale, because this is really exciting. You were talking before about our connection to our kids, and my wife and I often say that we're energetically sensitive. We're like, maybe because we drink a lot of juice, but we feel we can absorb the energy of other people. So in those moments when we are, getting those energies and there is a lot of disruption, what are some of the mindful practices that we can, you talked about taking deep breaths or whatever. What else can we do in real time during those moments?
Yeah. Well, I think it's beautiful that you and your wife have that experience. It shows that, that there's a lot of empathy and that you're probably both empaths. And the world can be a lot more difficult for those of us that have that sensitivity. And so there's a few different answers, things I want to share within that question. But the first thing I'll say is, so we don't want to start practice when we're triggered, right? That's not the time to practice for the first time. We practice when there's no problem, right? When there's no triggers, and maybe we imagine a trigger, right? I often, when I'm teaching classes, I'll have people close their eyes and I'll walk them through, think to a moment in the last few weeks where you had a hard time, right? So this is something everyone can do now if you're in a safe place to do that or not. And think of a time that was difficult, and with your eyes closed, and really get the experience of it. Where is it in the body? You feel tightness in the chest or in the belly, or the neck kind of tight, or the shoulders tight, and really get the feeling of it and let it sink in. And then I'll walk them through a little mindfulness practice. Lift up your back posture, take a breath, feel gravity, just take a minute and settle down. And then think of that same thing again. And ultimately, every time we go through that practice, we relate to it differently. So we want to practice that when we're not in the middle of it. So we want to take on, I'll often have clients. I had a client recently who has 2 daughters. She's an executive and she has 2 daughters. And so, and they love sparkly things. So I asked her, do you have any sparkly stickers at home? And she said, oh, we've got sparkly stickers. So I said, put these sparkly stickers all over. And so I encourage her to do this practice with her children. And have these stickers on your computer, in your wallet, in the cabinet, on the refrigerator. And you all agree, when you notice the sticker, you're going to take one breath, you're going to pause. You're just going to stop, just check in, and then move along. And so you're getting this practice of pausing, of stopping when you're not under pressure. And then when the pressure comes, maybe not, it takes a little bit of time. You're like, oh, I can do something, right? I know what to do now. And we pause and we take a breath. The body is such a, and I know you're doing body work over there. I mean, this is the work that you all care about, is how we take care of our bodies. And the body doesn't lie. So the body, that's why I say check in with the body. The body gives such good signals as to where we're triggered. And it also is how we can calm down. I'll often tell people, just feel your feet. Feel your feet. When I'm about to go on stage somewhere and give a talk, I'll often just ground in the feet, just noticing my feet on the ground. And that brings all the stress and anxiety right down. So there's a couple of ideas for how to kind of weave it into what we're already doing.
And, you talk about calm. I mean, is that related to mindfulness? Or can we always be calm while being mindful?
No. And in fact, we shouldn't even, I think mindfulness has a little bit of a bad, not a bad rap, but I don't know what word I'm looking for, but people relate to mindfulness as only being calm. And, I talk about in my book, we can be just as mindful of our anxiety or our anger or fear as we can of our joy and our happiness and our, calm, the experience of calm that we're having in our body. So no, we can be mindful of, mindfulness encompasses it all, right? John Kabat-Zinn has a book called Full Catastrophe Living. right? It's the full catastrophe of our entire lives we can wake up to. We can wake up to, we're walking down the street and smelling the flowers and, maybe doing a little mindful walking, really noticing our steps, noticing how the muscles moving from leg to leg. And all of a sudden there's a car crash, right? And there's a car crash not near us. And now I'm mindful of, right, all my energy is up here. I'm worried, right? I need to act. I need to do something. And we can be very awake. We can watch this happen. And as we watch it happen, we have much more access to our prefrontal cortex. So when we're in the midst of that emergency, we can actually stop for a minute and what's the best thing to do right now? Right? We can get to that much quicker than if we're just, completely, and the brain has the amygdala there, it's just hijacked, and we're not able to get to that critical thinking center where we can make creative decisions. So we can be mindful of that peaceful walk, and then we can be very mindful of our stress and anxiety when we heard that accident.
Now, I'm seeing here on my panel, we've got moms and dads tuned in here. Is this something that can benefit, to be more mindful? Is this something you're gearing towards moms, or can the dads benefit too?
No, the dads definitely benefit. There is no benefit just for the moms. In fact, my husband, too bad he's not here, he could tell you all about it. We really partner up together, and he does his own practices in the way that work for him. He's actually part of, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Mankind Project, and he sits in circle every week with a group of men, and they do their man circle. I'm not exactly sure all the things that go on there because it's secret, but that is, and they do some little practices in there, but they're doing a lot of inner work. He goes into prisons, talk about learning to hold discomfort, right? He's going in as a participant in this program and working with prisoners at Folsom Prison. This is a high security prison. And, he's come back from there telling me, I feel more free inside those walls than I do anywhere else in my life, because he's getting to just take off the mask and really show himself. So that is his practice. Right? In so many ways. So it doesn't look one way. It doesn't have to be only closing your eyes at the same time every day, right? For parents, it's often, in the car for 5 minutes listening to, Simple Habit or Headspace or one of these other apps, or it might be feeling the water on my hands as I'm washing the dishes, or feeling the water falling on me for 2 minutes in the shower. If you don't live in a drought where we live, we have to kind of get in and out. But it could just be in weaving these practices in. Men, women, mom, dad, it doesn't matter. It's for everyone.
What about meditation? Do you think that's something we should all embrace? Is that something that helps with this process?
Well, I think the word should. We shouldn't do anything. We should, the idea is to be drawn to it. And I worked with a lot of parents who just didn't want to meditate or weren't drawn to meditating in the beginning, but really took on a mindfulness practice, just noticing their experience, inner and outer, throughout the day. But I will always share with them, and I'll share with you and your listeners, that there is a value in that silence and in that stillness. And I'll tell you, when I first started sitting regularly when my kids were very young, it was very hard for me. I felt like I was wanted to run out of the room. I mean, I really had to start small, 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time, 15 minutes at a time. And I grew because I have a lot of anxiety and I did not know how to hold it. When I got still, it was very scary and disturbing to me. Within me. It's not that way for everyone. And so there is a value, because when you sit for long periods of time, you get to know your thought patterns. You get to know what goes on in your mind, right? Early on, I'm like, I'm either planning or I'm criticizing myself. And particularly that criticizing myself, that strong inner critic that I had, I didn't realize how much it was driving my life until I got to know the patterns. And I got to know the patterns, and then that pattern would show up. I'd criticize myself. I'd say, oh, you shouldn't have said that to that person, or you didn't respond the right way. And I would just hear that voice and say, yeah, okay, stay over there. And it wouldn't ruin my day or make me grumpy or angry before I didn't even know that was happening. So there is a value in meditation, and I encourage everyone to try it and to go work with a teacher and to sit for long periods of time if you can. I have on simplehabit.com, I have a 7-day, 5 minutes a day meditation for parents. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm not sure if it's free or not. I think it's free. But that's a nice little entry point, and then you kind of expand from there. So if you just take on a mindfulness practice and you just learn to notice and get curious and inquire about ourselves, that's wonderful. And then I hope it inspires parents to seek out kind of longer, deeper practice, and hopefully with different teachers. There's so many wonderful teachers out there.
Well, how old are your kids now?
14 and 11. One's going into high school, one's going to middle school, so I'm leaving primary school forever.
Right, because I'm going to say, like, as they travel through, my stepson's 11, we know the teen years are coming. We already see these prepubescent changes.
Yeah.
This is something we never master, because it's always that journey with our kids as they go through all these different phases, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where the curiosity, right, when we're well practiced in these practices, that curiosity comes up, because that is really where I am with my 14-year-old. I mean, he's definitely gotten moody and grumpy and different and, more annoyed. I just said something, he's homesick, and I said something to him, and he said, don't quote from books, Mom. I didn't even know what he was talking about. I'm like, I'm not quoting from a book. He's like, it's just so annoying. I'm just so annoying right now. And I know I can step back from that and watch it. No, it's really not personal to me. It's developmentally appropriate. He is meant to be differentiating from me. We've always had a very close relationship. And so it's going to be clunky and rocky. And we also have to meet them where they are. Just recently we had a little spring break away. We just rented a house up the coast for a few days. And my husband and other young son were out, and we stayed home, and somehow we ended up talking about the Enneagram, which is this wonderful system, this personality system. I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with it, but it's pretty deep. And I've talked to him about it in the past, but I said, how about we read our different Enneagram types and talk about it? And he wanted to listen to Eminem. So we went back and forth. We talked about the Enneagram, and we listened to Eminem songs, and then we were just talking about Eminem's Enneagram type. Right? And so what is his personality type? What drives him? What are his fears? So it was just this beautiful example. I felt like when I was in the midst of it, I was really like, this is rich. Like, this is rich. This is a coming together of what matters to me is helping him get to know himself. Like I told my kids, there's 2 things that need to happen by the time you leave here when you're 18 or however old you are, hopefully 18, off to college. You have to be alive, I hope. You have to be living, and you have to know who you are. You have to have a good understanding of who you are as a human being, right, as much as you can at that age right now. If those 2 things happen, I've done my job.
Now, you talk about embracing the messiness in our lives. What do you mean by that? How do we go about embracing the messy?
Yeah, embracing the messy. So it kind of points to what I was talking to earlier about holding discomfort. And so it's not just about holding discomfort, which is a big part of it, but it points to something you said earlier, which is always learning from our experience. So what if instead of, some disaster happens in the family, whatever it might be, and we just go into total victim mindset, right, and victim mode. And this goes to Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset. It's a wonderful book called Growth Mindset. But we don't go into a growth mindset. We go into victim. Why me? This is awful. I'm a terrible parent. And we've all had these, thoughts that come up. But if we can be aware of them, like, oh no, what do I have to learn here? Like, what is this trying to teach me? When we look back on our lives, I can't imagine anyone is tuning in that doesn't recall, if you ask them, where did you grow the most as a human being? It is always through the darkest times. It's never nobody ever talks about the happiest day of their life, of how they grew. It's always when we're broken into pieces and we have to put ourselves back together. That's where we grow. So if we can think of the mess of our lives as the greatest opportunities to grow as a human being, as a parent, as a person, then we can embrace the messiness in our lives in a different way.
That's a great way to look at it. And when we're dealing with our kids, what about all that anger and frustration that inevitably they will trigger? And what do we do with those emotions? How do we work through them? And it's fun to say it now, but I know what's going to happen next weekend.
Yeah. So we learn to lean in. And we lean into those difficult emotions. And again, we point to how are they going to teach me something? So if we can get into that mindset, then we can work with ourselves in that moment. And yes, we're going to get triggered. But there's a step behind that. So before we can fix, like when I get triggered, how do I fix it, right? That's what you're asking, essentially, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's being aware in the moment. We can think that's going to happen. But when you're triggered and you're repeating some of those patterns that maybe came from your parents, I mean, there's a lot of complexity to all this, you know, of what triggers us, how we react, and how we calm ourselves in that moment when, you know, we've been triggered.
Yeah, so we have to know our triggers first. That's why there's a step before actually calming ourselves down in the midst of the trigger. So I will often tell parents, write down all the things that trigger you. Like for me, being late. Like if I get the sense that we're going to be late, I know I can turn into a real bear. Right now with my older son, it's about going to bed. He doesn't want to go to bed anymore. And I'm a little bit of a cuckoo about sleep. And so this is on me. You know, he's not going to go to bed at the time I want him to go to bed anymore. You know, I have to let it go, and I'm really struggling to let it go. And so I know this time comes at night, and I notice, there I go. Like, it's coming. I'm getting irritated. And there's been plenty of nights I'm not as kind as I want to be, and I go to sleep, and I lay there, and I'm like, God, you blew that one. What are you going to do next time? Right? What are you going to do next time? Next time, I'm going to hold my tongue, you know, do what I can to support a decent bedtime and let it go, right? And it might not be till the third or the fourth night, and then I'll mess up again, and then it'll take another 4 or 5 nights later. And so it's all in increments, but we have to know our triggers. So I would encourage everyone listening, write down all of the triggers that you have. And some of them are from our childhood, and some of them are just things we've picked up in parenting, and there are little, you know, are the little things that annoy us personally, but they are often, as you pointed to, from our childhood. And our children are our greatest path to our freedom, because they are going to trigger us in ways nobody else will. So they are our greatest teachers. They're going to trigger us over and over again, and they're going to give us an opportunity over and over again to practice. We're either going to take that opportunity and try these different practices that we've learned, or we're going to be doing a lot of yelling and screaming, and there's going to be a lot of unhappiness. Yeah.
Well, I would think, since you and your husband, you know, you wrote the book and you're obviously living this actively, is there any kind of judgment that comes when you see when you see your husband reacting negatively, or you're feeling he's not being mindful? Maybe it's the other way around. Do you guys ever get into those kinds of moments where you try to help the other, or you might end up like you're judging the other and maybe even make matters worse?
Definitely. I mean, hopefully not as often as it was in the past that we'd be judging each other and making matters worse. You know, after all of this, I mean, I've done a lot of compassion work, self-compassion and compassion for others. There's a lot of beautiful practices. Kristen Neff's work is really wonderful around self-compassion. And, you know, when I see my husband having a hard time with the kids, really and truly, usually the first thing that happens is compassion for him and for the situation. So, you know, I might get a little triggered, but it very quickly moves to compassion for me now. And on my best days, I won't say anything. I'll let them have their moment, and then I'll talk to my husband afterwards. On my worst days, I'll try to get involved, or maybe I got triggered, and, you know, I'll make matters worse. But in general, you know, between the two of us, we'll usually let it play out on each side, and then we try to talk about it after. And that's usually my offer to parents when they ask me that question is, whatever you can do to not say something in front of the kids. I mean, it really is important in parenting to show that united front, but also be willing to say when a parent was wrong, right? Whether that was you or your partner.
Now, like this, in the book you talk about the 4 signs that a parent is being mindful. Can you share those 4 signs that we know that we're on the right path and we are, you know, that we've become a mindful parent? How can we identify that?
I don't remember the 4 signs. I'm being very mindful of my anxiety. Like, what 4 signs?
You better tell Wasabi to get that out of your question and answer.
Get that out of my questions. I'm like, I don't remember the 4 signs.
Wow, they got that. No, question number 22 there. I mean, I'm just going through these questions.
I'm going to get rid of that one. I'm so sorry. But I can definitely give some. So signs that we are being mindful. I'm gonna make it up here. We'll see if they're the same.
No.
Signs that we're being mindful. There's pause. So there's space in what we are, in our triggers when we get upset and our response, right? So I often will show whoever can see, I have my two fingers together, and normally in we don't have mindfulness, there's a thing that happens, and then there's our response to it, and they're right next to each other. There's no space in between the two. And then when we practice mindfulness, the space opens up, and then there's that thing that happens, and now there's a little space in between my fingers, and then there's our reaction. So there's some space. Other things that you'll see of a mindful parent, you may not see it, but there's self-compassion, like we were pointing to, before. So we're going to be kind to ourselves. We're going to know that we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to know that we can recover. And in fact, in that recovery and that repair, the relationship strengthens even more. I mean, after we've had a hard time and we've come back together and we've said I'm sorry's and we've had some learning, that relationship between parent and child is fused even tighter. So we're going to see self-compassion. We're going to see a willingness to repair, to say I'm sorry. Mindful parenting, we will also see, parents who are parenting mindfully in this way are on to themselves, right? So they catch it when they make a mistake or when they are out of their integrity, and they'll say it, right? I'll often say to my kids, I'm really not acting in the way that it doesn't even feel good. So there's an embodiment. Maybe that's what I'm pointing to. There's a connection to the body and to the signs of the body, and the drinking lots of juice and being very healthy. It really does help with those signs. Our systems are clear, our nervous system is clear, and we can really tune in and know how we're feeling. So there's 3, I think.
Thank you. I mean, it's good enough. We got through it, and I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Most of these questions are off the top of my head, but, some of them I'm just going over here because I thought it was a great question. Now, you call your husband and sons your best teachers. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean for families to, that those in our families can be our own catalyst for growth? How is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Possible? Absolutely. Similar to what I was talking about earlier, where, there's a wonderful quote by Byron Katie that goes something along the lines of, our friends, our parents, our siblings, they will trigger us in every different way until we learn what we're not ready to learn yet. They'll point us to our freedom every time. The quote goes something like that. So the family, I tell people all the time, I would never talk to anyone the way I talk to my husband or my kids. I'm my worst self at home. I mean, that's just the truth. And the reality is we're all out in the world, keeping it together, doing our best, staying peaceful and kind and calm. And then we get home, and it's not just our kids, because parents often say, oh, they're so good at school, and then they come home and, they're a disaster for me. And I always say, is there any of that in you as well? Because we do that too. We get home and we've been keeping it together all day long, and we start behaving badly. And so all the stuff gets churned up. And so that's right where it's messy and where it's churned up is where we have this opportunity to practice and to grow. So in that way, our families just become this amazing petri dish for how we can grow as human beings. For me, it's so beautiful, and it's so hard. It's so hard.
Love it. Leave me alone, Julie. I'm working. No, I don't know what you mean at all.
No, you would never talk to your partner that way. No.
She's Michelle Gale. Her book, again, is Mindful Parenting in a Messy World. We've got people to just go rewind here with us. You can ask some questions. We'll take some questions. Go ahead and type them in the box. We're going to close out the iHeartRadio part of the show, though. So the website is beamindfulparent.com. We'll have links to that under the show notes at juicegururadio.com. So I had to do that whole announcer thing. Let's thanks once again, Michelle. Michelle, thank you for being here on the show.
My pleasure. It's really fun.
I'm Steve Prusak, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Juice Guru Radio. Find out more about us at juiceguru.com. Until next time, get your juice on.